Welcome. It's October 24th, our sixth CLI meeting. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I don't have any particular announcements for today other than the feature freeze started. That basically means that no new features are allowed to land for 1.13 release. Bug bugs and the ones that we already have open are fine to work on. The test grid, if I remember correctly, Manchi was the person taking care of our test grid for the past 2 weeks. So Manchi, can you have a quick recap whether there was something going on over the past 2 weeks or it was okay, peaceful time?
Yeah, mostly it's everything is mostly green, but there is a GKE issue causing some GKE test case failing, but that was recovered, and everything looks fine now.
Okay, cool, thanks. I've noticed that there's one issue that was called out to SIG CLI. I think I was earlier today or yesterday by Josh Berkus. And I've noticed that Jordan opened APR to add some additional debuggings, but I think that might be related to what you're saying. So yeah, and especially that this is quite old issue that it's been there for since May or even sooner. Okay. We have the testing playbook pretty packed over for at least a couple next month. But just a reminder, if you want to play the role of our test on call person, whose responsibility is to have a look at the test grid and ensure that if there is a flag appearing that is assigned to our SIG, to respond, open an issue, or eventually ping the necessary person, or triaging the issue and providing with a possible solution. So if you're interested in participating in that role, feel free to add yourself to the doc for the free slots that are still there in December. Okay. Let's jump to the main topics of the agenda today. The first topic that I wanted to bring up is promoting plugin mechanism to beta. So as part of the effort that we went over the past release, which is 1.12, we rewrote the plugin mechanism. So that is currently similar to what Git does, which basically means if you have a binary in your path with a kubectl prefix, that binary will be picked as a kubectl plugin and executed. So for example, kubectl-foo can be then invoked as kubectl foo command. So far, we haven't seen any major issues with the new mechanism, and the ones that we've been assigned to are already fixed, even backported back to 1.12. The majority of the problems were filled by the CAP team. So thank you very much for that. That was very helpful to fix the issues over there. Currently, we're thinking about promoting this mechanism to beta to be more widely promoted. And additionally, both Juan and I will be talking about the mechanism during KubeCon in Seattle. But if you know about any issues, problems, concerns, whatever that you want to let us know, feel free to ping me or Juan. Or eventually, if you have any doubt whether we should not promote this mechanism, to beta yet, feel free to speak up now, or it will happen in the upcoming weeks.
Hi, Mache. I just had a quick question. I just heard from Amit about the Crew plugin manager. Have you had a chance to use that at all, or do you have any opinions on that, or what how we should move forward on that Crew plugin manager?
So the Crew plugin manager was presented at the SIG meetings some time ago, and that was actually when we were working on the new plugin mechanism. Per se, the mechanism, I remember talking with them back then that since we will be changing the new the plugins over to the new mechanism, I would really like to see them to switch over to the new mechanism as well. Per se, the idea of a plugin manager, I'm completely fine with the idea. I did not try the newest version. If I remember correctly, they did upgraded their current implementation over to the new plugin mechanism.
That's my understanding as well, and I thought I saw something within the last week, an announcement on Amit's part about supporting the new plugin mechanism with Crew. I was just curious if you guys were in contact.
I did not see or hear from him over the past weeks. So I'm assuming that everything is working just fine, because Amit, I think, was the one that filled in the issues, at least at the beginning of or towards the end of 1.12 release, I think somewhere around beta or even one of the release candidates, and we addressed his issues. From there, I remember that they were updating the implementation, and I asked to update the proposal, because there is a proposal open already in the community repo for a cap, actually, for the Crew plugin manager. So I'm hoping that as soon as they update the implementation, at least that's what I was told, the cap will be updated, and then we can push this forward.
Great.
If you get a chance to talk to Ahmed, it would be nice to figure out where they are when they are planning to update the cap. It would be nice to for them to show up on one of our SIG meetings and demo the current state of the project. I'm really interested in seeing how it is these days.
Yeah, me too. I'll see if I can reach out to Amit.
Cool, thanks. Are there any other questions or doubts with regards to promoting plugin to beta? Okay, in that case, we're jumping to the next topic, which is also plugin related, and I'm gonna give Juan chance to speak up for himself.
Thanks, Mache. So with the promotion of plugins to beta, we are considering a very limited approach to allowing plugins to, I would say, extend more than override existing commands. So there's a few concerns here, and I've gone ahead and linked to the official cap, which does highlight that we were considering this from the beginning since we started drafting the proposal. But long story short, there might be a need from the community to essentially add further behavior to commands that already exist via plugins. And so I think that since this is a valid use case, it would make sense to choose a very limited number of commands that we think would benefit from this, and essentially add a flag or annotation to those commands that the plugin mechanism could then see to know to allow essentially plugin executables to be invoked when the correct path is executed by a user. So an example of this could be maybe someone wants to extend the plugin command to add more overview of a user's plugins. So in this case, in kubectl, we would essentially annotate the plugin command in the command tree, and then the plugin mechanism would see, for example, when kubectl plugin foo is being invoked, and foo is a plugin executable that exists, it would see that the plugin command already exists, but it's annotated accordingly, and thus allows it to be extended. And so the kubectl plugin foo executable would be allowed to run in that sense. We would not want to do this with every command. So commands like kubectl get, for example, would get very messy if we did allow them to be extended. So one reason I could think for this is because maybe people would choose to add custom behavior for CRDs, for example, and debugging would become harder because it'd be hard to tell when it's an error from the client or the server or the plugin. So I think to at least start off with this improved behavior, it would be nice to have a very limited number of official commands, that wouldn't suffer from debugging hell, for example, to allow to be extended. A good point that I saw made by Amit actually on the mailing list discussing delete behavior recently was that if we choose to allow plugins to completely override existing commands, we could potentially run into the issue where maybe a malicious script could put plugins in a user's path, and then plugins would end up, or essentially users would end up accidentally or unknowingly executing a plugin executable when they don't mean to, when they execute a normal kubectl command. So there's a few things to consider before we allow perhaps users to completely overshadow existing commands. I think it's good to begin discussion on this now. I'll start a Google Doc where we can possibly highlight all of the things to consider regarding this. But yeah, for now, I think a good starting point is to select a few amount of commands, and I'll potentially draft a doc where we can reach consensus on which commands should be included as part of the extendability update for the next release. And with that being said, are there any questions, concerns, comments?
Well, my first question is probably to all of us whether we think that extending or shadowing the existing command is something that we want to at all provide. I'm not sure how other plugin managers or generally plugin mechanisms work in this matter. How many people will be actually interested in shadowing the built-in behavior? I'm slightly worried that if we allow this mechanism to happen, we will be assigned some issues from users that are not aware that they have a plugin actually in place instead of the built-in command. I can't think of any example, not to name any particular command, but this definitely poses a risk of us being flooded by some issues that not necessarily will be actually built-in commands problem, but rather will be a plugin implementation issue.
Should we bring this topic up to SIG auth or security-related SIG? As you mentioned, there's quite a few security considerations here. I'd also be curious to see what Git does in this case, since these are Git-style plugins.
Sure. So I think it's definitely a great idea to bring this up to SIG auth. Since, yes, it is a gaping hole in security, potentially. And with regards to what Git does, so we're actually a little bit different than Git plugins in that we actually allow a plugin to define its own path and subpath and so on and so forth via dashes. Whereas with Git plugins, I believe everything after the first dash, is interpreted literally as a dash. So I believe Git does not allow plugins to implement subpaths. Essentially, plugins are sort of forced to exist, as a single first level command. So a Git plugin could, for example, be named, get foobar baz with all dashes, but it would never have the ability to separate bar and baz via spaces. And so I believe because we're a bit different from Git plugins.
Yeah, but even with that, what will happen if I name my plugin Git checkout? Does it mean that the Git checkout will stop working, or Git will pick up the my checkout plugin, or it will complain that Git checkout is unknown and will just silently ignore the fact? Or have you ever tried this use case?
So I can't say I've tried it. I know it is possible to override. Let's see. Well, you can do aliases via bash and ZSH, but I'm not aware, at least, that you can override core Git commands via plugins.
Okay, let's see what happens, and then we can start the discussion from that point. This is definitely something that we should be evaluating. I'm somewhere in between. I'm not opposed to, but at the same time, I'm not too happy with this approach. So it would be good to get a strong decision whether we want to move in one or the other direction by just gathering feedback from what people want to do with plugins, as well as what other plugin mechanisms provide.
Definitely, and I saw Antoine just commented. So this is with regards to Git plugins. So does Git ignore your plugin if you attempt to? Okay. So yes, it looks like Git does behave similarly in that sense. I think that the only immediate use case I can think of for allowing a command to be overridden is essentially in the case of a package manager like Crew, where maybe they'd want to take advantage of the plugin command and maybe add to it for their specific use cases. So I think, if there's no opposition to just having the plugin command being extendable from the get-go and nothing else, that would also be a valid case for something I'd support. This is also not to imply that we will never reconsider the decision to extend other commands in the future. I think it's good to revisit this, in the future with time, or as users essentially put that request forward. But I think at the very least, the plugin command could benefit, from this, even if it's the only one we extend.
Are there any other questions, suggestions with regards to shadowing existing commands? Okay, the next topic is server-side GET, but with watches. And Juan, you're up again.
Sure. So where we left off with server-side printing was that essentially we switched the get command to, by default, request table objects from the server. What this means is that the server tells the client how to print human readable output instead of the client having to know how to print human readable output for each resource. What we did not do as part of this update is implement that same behavior as part of watching resources. So although the normal kube-control get command is able to handle a table response from the server, adding the watch flag to the command makes it fall back to the previous behavior of having the client look up a hard-coded list of handlers to know how to print human readable output for a resource. Since the overall goal is to completely eliminate any of that old behavior from kube control, then it makes sense that we address this by having the watch behavior of kube control get work with table objects. The only limitation we currently have that I've seen for updating the watch behavior is that watch depends on events being emitted from the server. And these events include external object versions in them. So when you're watching a pod, for example, the watch behavior of kube control get knows to reprint that object whenever it receives an event from the server containing the updated object. Because the client needs to rely on the server to tell it what specifically to print about that object, then we would need for the server to emit events with table objects in them as well. So we would need to essentially update the events API at least, or even if it's just updating the event object in order to optionally include a table object so that the client can completely snip its dependency on internal version printers. And just as an aside, so right now what happens is the client receives an external version object via an event, and then it converts that to an internal version, and then does the lookup, which is the complete opposite of what we want. So yeah, I think this is mostly what I have for this. I will see if I can sync with other teams to get that change on the server side.
Yeah, we will definitely need the SIG API missionary sign off on that one, because that will require changes in the server code to present the watches in the new mode, definitely. Are there any questions, concerns with this mechanism? Okay, jumping off to the next topic that was brought up this week in the mailing list, which is, I think, Mark, you wrote out an email about having an option for interactive delete command. I was asked about that particular functionality several times already, and in majority of the cases, my response to that was that, well, confirmation for any type of actions in the CLI is quite cumbersome, and the main goal for confirmation was coming from graphical user interfaces, where by accident you could click, for example, delete, and remove your resource or whatever your graphical interface is dealing with. It's slightly harder when it comes to the CLI because you literally type the commands. Of course, there are a tons of helpers in the CLI, like tab completions, copy paste, backward searches to replay the same commands, etc., that make the accidental execution of commands slightly simpler. And then at the same time, I realized that the majority of the Linux servers that I've worked with have an alias for the remove command, which ensures that every single time you're removing resources as a root user, you are being asked for confirmation. So as long as I was very opposite to have that kind of functionality by default in a kubectl delete command, because that would break backwards compatibility, I proposed to add interactive flag as a separate flag to kubectl delete. I'm not sure how others feel about it. Yeah. What do others think about the idea? Are there any concerns, security issues with this?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just want to verify that the interactivity that I was thinking, it was not if you delete an entire namespace to ask if you want to delete the individual components of the whole namespace. Instead of that, I was thinking about if you type to control delete the name of namespace, this will print all the list of the components that you are going to delete. So at the end, you only will answer yes or no, but you won't answer each of element that of the namespace. But still, I think that was asking Juan in the mailing list, so I just want to clarify that. But it's more simple than that. It's simply yes or no.
So I'm not 100% sure that I want to be provided with the information that yes, you're going to delete, by removing this namespace, you are going to remove this many deployment paths, etc., because that might make the command clumsy. Additionally, that will unnecessarily require the delete command to build the tree of the resources that are present in the namespace, which might be only a couple of resources, but might also be significantly big namespace with huge amount of resources. So I would really like to avoid that part of the of your proposal. Yeah.
Even that without any flag, or definitely without.
Well, the only reason that you want to.
Sorry.
So the use cases that I was presented with, in 99% of cases, were accidentally removing a namespace, which basically means you're destroying not a single resource, but you're literally removing tons of resources that you had in your namespace by accident. So the need for, reaching to the server to get the list of resources that are available in that particular namespace of yours seems somewhat overwhelming. But just having the fact that you are being asked when you're working as a cluster administrator, because I'm assuming that you have a proper RBAC in place, in which case you should not be able to easily remove the namespaces. Yeah.
So
Juan, you had some. Yeah. Go ahead.
I left some thoughts on the mailing list thread, mainly concerning the scriptability and the precedent that this might set for the future. So, it might not seem like maybe a big deal now, but this might introduce the notion that it might be okay to add interactive behavior here and there, not just for the delete, but for any commands in the future, whether it's a command update or an entirely new command. And so I think that this, like you said, it might make it clumsy for people that depend on scripts, for example. that all of a sudden they have to sort of tread carefully when writing their scripts because they might use a flag that causes interactive behavior or not. So I think at the very least, we should try to see if there's a non-interactive solution to preventing accidental deletion of namespace. Well, any resource, but namespaces in particular in this case. I think an idea that was presented a while back that involved having an annotation serve as a safeguard for accidental deletion. I think that's something worth revisiting. So for those unfamiliar with that idea, the main gist was that you would have a specific annotation on a resource that you, the namespace admin, for example, would place on that resource. And then, when deleting time came about, if your resource had that annotation, then the server would reject deletion of that resource, be it a namespace or not, unless either you removed that annotation, or in this case, I guess we could have a specific non-interactive flag for the delete command, such as confirm, which removes that annotation perhaps before sending the object over for deletion.
If I remember correctly, the flow that we suggested for what you said was that you would have a admission plugin that will be looking at the label or annotation, and if it is present, it would reject every single delete operation, which would require you to manually remove the annotation and only then replay the delete operation. That would be a two-step process that can be easily implemented currently with the mechanism, because we have the webhook admission plugin that allow you to hook into, for example, deletion of all resources. So it is possible these days to have something in place that will save you the trouble from having the interactive method.
Okay, and so that's great. And so with that in mind, I'd be more inclined to have a flag introduced to delete that maybe removes this annotation for you when you explicitly provide this flag, than maybe an interactive message.
Right, but then that forces you to some conventions around annotation, which is somewhat not necessarily desirable, and it would also require you to write the second part, which is the admission, and that's something that we don't want to do as part of SIG CLI. Sean was quoting the Unix manual, and basically lowercase I is prompt for before every removal. There's also uppercase I, which prompts before removing more than 3 files or when removing recursively. Yeah. So the question is how others feel with this exception, because honestly, that would be the only place where we would allow the interactive to happen. Yet still at the same time, there are possible solutions in place already that can ensure that we don't need to do the interactive stuff and leave the interactive parts only for the graphical interfaces.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think you should actually have to do something in order to get into interactive mode. So the default mode should not be interactive.
No. That's off the table. We cannot change the default behavior.
Yeah, that's what
if we are going to introduce, it will be similar to the -i in the removal tool from Unix, but so that you as a cluster admin can have an alias for the kubectl delete command, which will always ensure that you are running with delete with -i, for example. But that cannot be a default option because we will break the backwards compatibility. Okay, let's, so basically, folks, if you have any objections, feel free to respond to the mailing list, SIG CLI, and raise your concerns why you think we should not add the interactive. I'm currently somewhere in the middle of whether I do want to support this idea or I don't. I can basically defend both ideas. So I'm looking for particular voices in either direction, and the majority of the voices in either is going to probably rule whether we have it or not. Okay, one final topic is from our Potier about the dual stack cap. You want to quickly describe what it is about? I do remember that you've been present and you've been bringing this up some time ago.
Yes, yes, this is Rob Potier. I did send that out on the email list, but basically this is the proposal that we added is to add dual stack, so there'll be a v6 IP address and a v4 IP address associated with each pod. So like the changes will be in like the get pods and describe pods. The get endpoints will now have multiple IP addresses. We're looking at having like comma delimited IP addresses. Initially, there'll be just one v4 address and one v6 address, but the future, it's possible there could be multiple IPv6 addresses. So yeah, I just wanted to bring this cap up and was hoping to get some reviews from the CLI community.
I did look at your proposal right after you sent it out over to the SIG CLI mailing list. And overall, I didn't have any objections. The proposal that you put together, the proposed changes in the kubectl describers and printers seemed reasonable to me, so I did not have any objections. Let me quickly scroll to where that was.
There's also a question that Tim Hawkins just commented on that he asked you guys to look at with the downward API.
So I just have a quick question. As we mentioned before about defaults, is your proposal to change the way that current commands work, or is this nothing but additions to currently using, say, flags or whatever that are related to the networking? Did that make sense?
Yeah, if you're only using a single stack, IP, if you're only using v4 or v6, then, nothing would change. But if you do add, multiple, if you do add a v4 and a v6 dual stack, then the displays would change.
Okay, yeah, that would be my major concern is that, previous commands would continue to work and that they wouldn't have to change flags, but that this new functionality would be, with new flags and new columns, which sounds like that's the case.
Well, not quite.
Yeah, that would be the.
Well, not quite. From what I'm looking at the proposal, the one that I have actually highlighted, it is just expanding the current field with the additional data, depending on whether you're working in dual stack or whether you're working in the v4 or v6, which basically means you would have extended output for IP column both in get command as well as a describe command, which would give you the IPs based on the stack that you have enabled, whether both or one or the other. Is that correct?
Yes, I think, right. If there's only one, if you only have one IP, then you're only going to get to one display. And I do have a question though. On the screen on the described pod, you notice there it shows IPs. Would you prefer that this replaces the current IP, or should we display like the current IP, which would just have one preferred IP and then another column that has IPs that's plural? There on line 254.
Yeah. If we to change one, we would have to change both, actually. Unless IP in the get command will be only the main IP, and the scribe would provide you with the main and other. Can we have currently more than one IP on a pod?
Currently the CNI allows it, but Kubernetes doesn't know anything about a second IP.
Yeah, but the only case where you will be having more than one IP is when you're running dual stack, or that's not quite right?
Yes. I mean, that could be in the future, in V6 mode, it's possible in the future you could have more than one V6 address, but currently it's only one of each. And the other one I'd like you to take a look at is the get endpoints, which will be a little bit further down. That's a little bit. Yeah, there. Oops, there we go. There.
Okay, I'll have a look, and I'll try replying to Tim about this. I need to see where we are currently, but yeah, I'm not 100% sure that we allow multi-line. That I'm not 100% sure. Okay, I'll take a look at it and we'll comment on the proposal.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, thanks very much. Okay, stand-ups. I see Sean put some stand-up. You want to update us on the kubectl independence progress?
Sure. First, I'd like to say a big thanks to Maciej and Juan especially, and as well as Antoine for the reviews. I think we've made really good progress. There's 31 remaining imports over 8 core dependencies. And actually, most of the remaining have to do with printing. So printing is going to be a thorny issue. In fact, I'm hoping that Maciej and Juan can stick around for like 2 or 3 minutes just so that we could connect about the describers. But I think that we've actually made exceptional progress. There are 2 to 3 other issues besides the printing. One is interrupts, and Clayton actually has a PR that he's moving that functionality into its own repo, actually, or into the util repo, if I remember correctly. There's a different approach that I took, was just to pull it into kubectl, but I think Clayton's is much more general and helpful to the rest of the community. There's something about RBAC reconciliation, which is actually pretty thorny, and it has to do with the RBAC auth reconcile or kubectl auth reconcile command, which I didn't even know we had until recently. And that one, I don't have an idea of how we're going to approach it. It's only one import, but it has a lot of transitive dependencies, and it's not a candidate for pulling all of that code into kubectl or copying it in. And then the other thorny one had to do with versioning. There's some global variables that have to do with the version of the client and the server that get baked into the releases. And it's not clear to me now how we're going to address that one. But like I said, I think we made great progress, and I think it's going to be kind of just a lot of work trying to get printing to depend more on external versions versus internal versions in order to be able to move forward on that remaining large issue. But I'd like to talk to you guys later if that's okay.
Sure. Does anyone else have any stand-up topics that I want to share? Okay, hearing none. With that, thank you very much for today, and we're going to close today's meeting. See you in 2 weeks, folks. Bye.